Welcome to the 129th season of the Canadian Club Toronto, Canada's podium. For over a century, this stage has united visionaries and leaders from politics, business, community, and the arts to share insights on the most pressing issues of our time. And with Canada in a pivotal moment, it's more important than ever that we come together.
We've been having important discussions and debates around this podium in this country for well over a century. I call this a historic podium of record.
Our club's always been a forum for visionaries, public figures, and decision makers to command attention to the issues of our time.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to those joining us online. Once again, I'm Shazanne Chu, President, Canadian Club Toronto, and your host this afternoon. The world is shifting. Geopolitical alliances, global security, and economic strength are all in flux. As Canadians, it's essential to understand how our nation can assert leadership and resilience during this time of change. Today, we will hear from the Honourable Anita Anand, Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs, who brings her extensive experience, thoughtful diplomacy, and commitment to principled leadership to one of the nation's most important portfolios. We are proud to present this event thanks to the generous support of TD and Sun Life. Thank you both for making this possible. To our season sponsor, Canadian Bankers Association, and our official airline sponsor, Air Canada, thank you. And to Canada's Forest Trust Corporation, our nature partner, who help us reduce our carbon footprint by planting and stewarding a smart forest in our honor. Thank you as well to Simon Dwyer from Bell, who has sponsored student tables from the Munk School of International Affairs and U of T's Political Science Department. We're pleased to have you all here. Now, a few housekeeping items before we begin. To find more information about our upcoming events, please visit our website at canadianclub.org. And while you're there, consider becoming a member if you are not one already. We also encourage you to post about today's discussion on your social media channel of choice to extend the conversation beyond these walls. And now I'm sure you'll all have questions for Minister Anand about Canada's role on the world stage. Please use the Q&A cards on your tables, and our volunteers will come around to hand them to our moderator. For those joining us online, please hit the Submit a Question button on the right side of your screen, and we'll look out for those as well. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce our guest of honor, the Honourable Anita Anand. MP for Oakville East, has served in key cabinet roles, including Minister of Public Services and Procurement, President of the Treasury Board, Minister of National Defence, and is now Minister of Foreign Affairs. She has led critical files on national security, defence procurement, and Canada's COVID-19 vaccine rollout, and continues to shape Canada's foreign policy with strength and purpose. Once Minister Anand shares her opening remarks, she will be joined in conversation with Janice Stein. Janice is founding director of the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto. She is one of Canada's most respected voices on international affairs and public policy and brings deep insight into global strategy and security. We are lucky to have her here today. And now, Minister Anand, welcome to Canada's podium.
Well, hi, everybody. I just broke one of my golden rules of parenting, which is I always tell my kids when they're about to write an exam, don't have a big meal before you go write it, because all the blood, this is my non-scientific interpretation of what happens with our physiology and our digestive system, but all the blood from your brain will go down to your stomach. This is what I've been telling them their whole lives. I just broke the rule because I'm about to do my exam, and I ate a full meal and 2 desserts, and here we go. But really, in all seriousness, thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. I have been really, really looking forward to coming, and I appreciate the Canadian Club's patience with our scheduling that has occurred to make sure that I could get here. Et aussi, merci pour l'invitation. Je voudrais avoir une bonne conversation avec vous tous aujourd'hui, avec des questions de Madame Stein aujourd'hui. Mais premièrement, peut-être je pourrais commencer avec un cadre. I'd like to start with talking about the framework for our foreign policy. And this will not only inform the Q&A that I'll have with Janice, but also give you a sense of what we're doing in foreign policy. What is our approach? Why are we taking the decisions that we're taking? Now, the Prime Minister and I often speak about the pivotal moment that we are finding ourselves in globally. And I'll just say, as a former Minister of National Defense, I have seen over the past number of years the geostrategic environment shifting in monumental ways. Coupled with this now is a time of economic stress in which our foreign policy, therefore, must be calibrated not only vis-a-vis global conflict, but also vis-a-vis economic and world trade order disruptions. And we'll talk about that through this next few minutes. The way in which I did my undergrad in political studies at Queen's in the late 80s. And I'll just say, I never thought I would ever use the word hegemony after I graduated. Lo and behold, the word hegemony and the work of Cohen and Nye, multilateralism, and the work that Canada has done on the world stage since the end of the Second World War have been absolutely instrumental to my understanding and the work I'm doing on the international stage. But what we are seeing is that global power is transforming from hegemony to a great power rivalry with competing spheres of influence. And we see it on a daily basis, this world that we live in that is moving rapidly, shifting from multilateralism to multipolarity. At the heart of these changes is technological advancement, which is shrinking geography and expanding the fields of conflict to cyberspace and orbit above the Earth. And these conflicts are no longer being fought only with machines and ammunition, but also with misinformation and transnational repression. National and economic security are paramount, and they go hand in hand. And I often say, let us not, when we are thinking about policy, think about them only in terms of, well, the Minister of National Defense is in charge of defense and security, and the Finance Minister is in charge of our economic well-being, and therefore they don't need to be at the same meetings together. On the contrary, We cannot think about global issues in silos anymore. These issues are inextricably linked, as I will discuss. Now, as I suggested, Canada has prospered under the old system, and we will prosper under the new world order, and we will do that for 3 reasons. And the first is that Canada has what the world wants. You've heard the Prime Minister say this before, but let me explain what this means. We are an energy superpower with clean and conventional energy. Over 80% of Canada's electricity grid is clean and is expanding by tens of gigawatts. We're developing one of the world's largest oil and natural gas reserves to be the lowest risk and lowest carbon suppliers in the world. And we possess some of the world's largest reserves of critical minerals. And it is here that we can take an example of the tight relationship between economic and security and defense policy. Because where countries are vying for rare earths and critical minerals, we also have a need to build our defenses, to secure our sovereignty, and in particular, the Arctic. And we must do that in conjunction with Indigenous peoples. Canada is also at the same time a leader in AI development, and our research universities, I must give a shout out to the University of Toronto, where I am on leave from, and I will be going back at some point. I thought it was going to be this year, but it didn't turn out that way, but I will be going back. No, but in all seriousness, we hold a place internationally as a leader in AI and new technologies. We now, as you have seen recently, are attracting and training the world's best talent in quantum and computer engineering. That is at the forefront of our foreign policy. So you can see how these issues, critical minerals, energy, AI, whereas those had been domestic public policy issues, are at the forefront of our foreign policy now. And wherever I go, I am talking about those very issues on the world stage as part of our foreign policy. What do we have to negotiate with you? Well, we have what the world wants. Second is our values. Ça, c'est la deuxième raison pour laquelle nous devrions prospérer. C'est que nous avons des valeurs auxquelles une bonne partie du monde aspire. What I mean by that is countries look to Canada not only because of our competitive advantages in the areas I just mentioned, but also because of the values that we have stood for, that they can depend on us to continue to stand for. And those values include collaboration, cooperation, and respecting some of the most basic rules that have kept us all safe since the end of the Second World War. Now, the third reason, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time here, the third reason that we will thrive in this new era is because we have the determination to meet this moment. We're building strength here at home, and we are defending values that advance our interests. And I'm going to talk about the domestic points and then internationally what we are doing. Domestically, we have cut taxes on incomes for 22 million Canadians. We've removed all federal barriers to interprovincial trade. I have to pause there because for a brief moment, I was the Minister of Internal Trade, and it was one of my favorite files because it just screamed for attention, and we were able to move on that beginning in January 2025, all the way through. It was one of the policy proposals that Prime Minister Carney also felt very moved about, as did I. And so I was kind of sad when I was moved out of that internal trade, but it's just not about me, as my kids would say. So let me continue. So removing all barriers to interprovincial trade, catalyzing hundreds of billions of dollars in investment. You've seen the numbers in the budget. And the dollars that will be spent on strategic energy and trade infrastructure, as well as AI and critical minerals and dual-use Arctic ports, for example, to open up our economy and protect our sovereignty, are absolutely key. And again, you can't talk about those investments without thinking about our spending on national defense. $82 billion were committed in the most recent federal budget towards defense and security and dual-use infrastructure. Again, you see the interplay between the money that we are spending domestically to build infrastructure like ports and airports and roads, and how important that will be for our national security. And here it is important to mention that we are going to meet the 2% NATO target, 2% of GDP this fiscal year, and we are going to meet the 5% target by 2035. And we're doing that while diversifying our trade, investment, and security partners. And here, if we move to the international environment for a moment before concluding, I will mention that we are now signatories of an economic and security partnership with the EU. That is the most comprehensive ever between the EU and a non-member state in terms of a partnership along these lines. We've announced dozens of new economic and security partnerships across 4 continents in less than 6 months: South Africa on nuclear, Germany in critical minerals and AI, Sweden and Chile in technology. Donc, il y a beaucoup de choses que nous avons fait déjà. Nous avons beaucoup de travail à faire dans l'avenir, mais il y a le progrès là. And I don't want to leave this section without mentioning the FTA with the ASEAN in 2026. When I was in the ASEAN in the summer in Malaysia, we were hoping it would get done by this Christmas. So we are making good progress, and I know that my colleague, Minister Sidhu, is working hard on ensuring that that is completed in 2026. I say all of this recognizing, of course, that we, Canada, we are not the only pragmatists in the world. This is what countries along the same lines are thinking. At the G20, for example, I was delayed, that's flight-wise, but by the time I got there, the Prime Minister had signed with India and Australia a new trilateral partnership to accelerate our cooperation on clean energy, critical minerals, and AI. That happened at the G20, on the sidelines of the G20. So diplomacy, negotiation, it's occurring in real time. It is urgent, it is fast, and it is important to meet the moment. As part of our G7 presidency, we launched a critical minerals buyers club to secure reliable supply chains. As a founding member of the Coalition of the Willing, we're one of the largest per capita donors for Ukraine. And we're coordinating with the Nordic-Baltic 8 to safeguard Arctic sovereignty and protect NATO's northern flank. So we have good reason to be optimistic. We have momentum. We have wind in our sails, but make no mistake, the world is more dangerous and divided. Old alliances are being recast, new ones are forming, and our engagements will become more calibrated as our horizons broaden. To conclude, my friends, foreign policy today is not business as usual. It is pragmatic, and it is pragmatism imbued with urgency. We have the resources the world needs. We have the talent and ingenuity to transform that potential into growth. And most of all, we have the ambition to match the challenges of this new age. We need you, members of the business community and beyond, to keep building Canada strong, including in our financial and capital markets. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Anand. You may hear that my voice is partially gone. My children tell me that is a blessing. I want to thank Minister Anand for what is a truly terrific speech. This is the minister's first foreign policy speech that she has delivered in Canada. So, and it is great to have you with us. You're traveling all the time. I could say as you should, but that's why this was so difficult to arrange.
Well, it's funny that you say as you should, because one time I was on a flight and I saw a call come in from the Prime Minister. You know how you can see the call, but you can't pick it up?
Did he say, "Where the hell are you"?
No, I texted him and I said, "I'm sorry, I cannot pick up your call as I am on a flight." And he said, "As you should be." So I didn't feel so guilty.
There you go. I thought it was, "Where the hell are you?" Because there are people that expect that you're going to pick up that phone no matter what. Minister, you have made 2 trips that just jumped out at me in the midst of everything you've done. You went to New Delhi and to India. You had a one-on-one with Prime Minister Modi, which I can tell you all does not happen all the time. So, and I was watching with pride. Talk to us about how you see Canada's relationship being reset with India, and why does it matter to us? Why is it so important to us?
Okay, well, let me just take a step back, if I could, and talk about my approach to foreign policy, and then I'll talk about the India trip, and then hopefully we can talk about China as well.
Yep.
But the approach I have to diplomacy really flows from some of the things I said earlier, is that we are in a moment where we must have conversations with countries where Canada's interests can be advanced. That's intentional diplomacy. That's pragmatic diplomacy. Does that mean that we are sacrificing our values and our concerns relating to public safety and security? Absolutely not. Does that mean that we are going to avoid difficult topics? Absolutely not. But in order to advance Canada's interests, we need to be at the table. We need to sit at the table and have a tough conversation whenever necessary and advance our foreign policy priorities. That's why I went to India. That's why I went to China. And that's the approach to diplomacy that I am taking. We need, in this moment, to find the path towards advancing Canada's economic interests while ensuring that we are staying true to key concerns of Canadians relating to public safety and security.
So, Minister, where do you see the relationship with India going in the next year or 2?
So we have a strong economic relationship with India as it is. For example, 50,000 jobs in India have been created by Canadian firms. 36,000 jobs have been created in Canada by Indian firms. There's a strong basis for bilateral economic cooperation already, not to mention the work that our pension funds and investment funds are doing in India. Where we are going is exactly what we identified in South Africa. We decided, and I decided to take this step-by-step approach to reestablishing a relationship with India. That is, one, have a public safety and security dialogue. Make sure that that is occurring at the highest levels and is ongoing to advance Canadian concerns relating to the rule of law. Two, ensuring that we have high commissioners in place. And three, staffing up our missions. These are all precursors to heightened relationships in other areas. Four, when I went to India, we signed a joint statement highlighting public safety and security, but also indicating that economic resilience and cooperation on energy and making sure we are working together on AI, as well as developing people-to-people ties, are also part of the equation. That set the stage for the Prime Minister and Prime Minister Carney and Prime Minister Modi to meet in South Africa and agree that negotiations would begin for a comprehensive economic partnership where we would double trade with India by 2030.
I mean, that's an ambitious goal, but so important. India will be the largest economy in the world.
US $4 trillion per year.
Yeah.
The fastest growing large economy.
And that matters to Canadians. Tell us a little bit about the New Deal that was signed on the sidelines of the G20 with
India and Australia on AI and critical minerals,
right,
etc. So there is a push at these summits because key players are on the ground to negotiate the side agreements or these types of cooperative signals of cooperation on areas that is more palpable than in your regular course of business every day. And so things moved very quickly, but I will say that the conversations that need to occur before something like that happened had taken place.
This is exciting, for people in the room. We were not part of AUKUS, the agreement with the United States, Australia, India, the famous agreement on submarines. Mais excuse, monsieur, because we have a representative of the French government with us. So you weren't the only ones that felt badly. We felt badly too. This breaks the mold now for Canada when you've created this kind of partnership.
Exactly. It does break the mold, but let me just reiterate, $82 billion on defense, okay? I mean, we're buying subs. We are investing in procurements. We are paying the Canadian Armed Forces more. We are going to ensure that the Arctic is more sustained in terms of infrastructure, dual use infrastructure in particular, which is so important as we see Russian infrastructure moving further and further north towards the Arctic Circle. So once again, this link between economic security and defense and security writ large cannot be more important than it is at this moment.
It really is changing our policy on the ground, as you said, in real time. Minister, you went next to China. I think we all understand that we've gone through a challenging period, and it looks like the Prime Minister is deeply interested in the results of that trip, prepared to take it further. Tell us why China matters to us and how you see that relationship developing.
So sometimes people use the language of resetting relationships, and that isn't quite accurate because it suggests that we want to put the past behind. And that's not the case. We are recalibrating the relationship with China to advance Canada's interests, recognizing, as we said in the Indo-Pacific strategy, that there are concerns that we will raise. At the same time, we have to remember that two-way bilateral merchandise trade in 2024 totaled $118.7 billion. In other words, we can't ignore the need to develop these trading links further, and how we do that is going to be in a recalibrated way. So when I was in Beijing, this was the conversation that I had with my counterpart, Minister Wang Yi. It was a visit where we put our respective concerns on the table, went through, it was a 2.5-hour meeting, and went through in detail the issues that are at the core of our economic position and concerns so that we can continue to engage.
Do you see our economic relationship deepening? Do you see trade growing?
That's the work we're doing right now on the ground. So the Prime Minister, for example, had a meeting with President Xi at the APEC summit. It was a very positive meeting, and we are doing additional work to advance Canada's interests, of course. We have heard from the agriculture sector, for example, that canola is being hit very hard. It was for that reason that I engaged not only my Chinese counterpart, but also on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, the Foreign Minister of Pakistan. Pakistan is one of the world's largest importers of canola. So what I said to him is, could you please lift your restrictions on Canadian canola? And he actually, this was the end of September, he said, I will do that by October 31st. I said, okay, thank you very much. Can we shake on that? And sure enough, October 30th comes and he calls me up and said, I've lifted the restrictions on Canadian canola and we've placed orders.
Wow.
It was unbelievable to me. That shows you the power of the conversation. You need to have the conversation. Walk up to the table, sit down at the table, raise your issues and concerns, and let it be known that this is what is in Canada's interest. I did that during vaccine procurement, for example, and you need to be professional, and you also need to be aggressive.
Yeah, and you need to engage. You need to engage. It also shows you, by the way, the pace at which things are moving. 4 weeks to get those trade restrictions. We need to keep up in this country. Let's go to Europe now. And we have representatives here from Germany, Italy, France. Bienvenue à tous. We've signed extensive agreements since your government was stood up, both for defense. There are agreements on AI. There are discussions about digital highways. How do you see our relationships with Europe deepening?
We have continued, and this actually happened even before the election in April. We have continued to build up the relationship bilaterally with European countries as well as with the EU as a whole. You mentioned the Security and Defense Partnership. There's also the SAFE agreement. We're the only non-European to be part of SAFE. Essentially what that allows Canadian firms to do in the defense area is to compete for procurements in Europe on the same footing as European companies. And this is great news for the Canadian defense industry. So the markets for their goods, for their product, will continue to grow. This is just an example, a microcosm of the type of work we're doing to ensure that the Canadian economy is able to benefit from our foreign policy. And I'll take you right back to my first days as the Minister of Foreign Affairs, where having done this undergrad degree, I thought myself, like, the best thing I will do right now, especially given what I've done in government, is I will write down my thoughts on our foreign policy at this crucial moment in a trade war when we need our diplomatic relationships to work for our country. So the key thing, and this is very academic to quote yourself, sorry, Janice, the key thing that I wrote was diplomacy has to be in service of our economic interests domestically. We need to ensure that our diplomats abroad are not only developing strong relationships with other countries, but the purpose behind doing that is to advance the dire economic concerns that are at the heart of Canadians' mindset now. So foreign policy, again, is inextricably tied to our domestic economy.
And Minister, if I can ask you probably what is a slightly impolite question. We have signed more free trade agreements than any other country, and we're a member of them. But frankly, we don't always take advantage of these opportunities. This has been a historic Canadian problem. So in your capacity as foreign minister, how do you do more of this? How do you reach out to our private sector leaders, not only big ones, but the small and the medium-sized ones, and say there are opportunities for Canadians to move into new markets? We've been too comfortable too long. How do we change that?
Well, I come at this from the same mindset as you do, Janice, in the sense that I practiced corporate and securities law, and I taught corporate and securities law for almost 25 years. I believe in the vibrancy of Canadian capital markets, but I know about the need for growth as well. And I feel fortunate that we can now use our diplomacy in service of those interests. And in particular, you're right. I say it myself. We're the only G7 country that has a free trade agreement with every other G7 country. But we're still 80% dependent for our trade on one country. What we need to do is leverage those trade agreements while creating new opportunities with new partners so that the opportunities for small and medium-sized enterprises as well as large firms are undeniable, that there will be no reason not to move in the direction of a diversified trade economy.
I couldn't agree more. You know, we have a whole table of students here. What do you think, Premier? Should we ask all our students to travel abroad for a year and we build it into the DNA when people are young? Absolutely, says the Premier. Minister, you talked about the Arctic. The Arctic is if you travel to the Arctic as you have, as I have, you literally see the Arctic warming. It is warming at the fastest pace. And just in the last 10 days, a Chinese ship traveled to Europe through the Northern Passage, which cuts travel time by 20 days, which is remarkable. What do we need to do to not only build the defense infrastructure that you talked about in your speech, because the Russians are spending 15 times on defense infrastructure in the Arctic in comparison to all the rest. What do we need to do, and what do we need to do to build the civilian and economic infrastructure? Because this will be such an important part of our future.
So you're right to point to the need to bolster our presence in the Arctic and to do that in conjunction with Indigenous peoples. I want to make sure that we know and are cognizant of the fact that we have an arrangement with the United States that has been longstanding for decades under NORAD, where aerospace defense has been very solid. And we are now reinforcing aerial surveillance through the modernization of the North Warning System. And as the Prime Minister announced early on in his tenure, we are spending $6 billion on over-the-horizon radar, again, for aerial defense that will meet this age of threats. At the same time, as you mentioned, there are marine and even terrestrial concerns, especially given the melting polar ice caps. And our view is that this is our top defense and security priority, in fact. And I would say this $80 billion that you are seeing committed will be extremely important in the development of infrastructure in the Arctic, ports and airports in particular. But let's remember, and this is why our Arctic foreign policy is so important, there are other countries who also share these concerns. And I have been deeply engaged with Finland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Iceland because they share these concerns. And what I spoke with the Secretary General Mark Rutte about last week at NATO is Canada's exported our defense and military spending over 2 world wars to Europe. It is time for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization to focus as well on the North Atlantic and the Arctic. We need to address these threats, and we need to address them together. So that's the type of work I think is important.
You know, that is a really, really great point that you made. We often don't think of ourselves that way, but we are a frontline state in NATO because, in fact, our border and Russia's borders meet in the Arctic, but we don't think about ourselves that way. Minister, in the 2 minutes or 3 minutes that we have left, there has been a frenzy of negotiation with peace plans moving back and forward, 28 points, 19 points, 16 points, and the process is still ongoing. I know how keenly you feel about Ukraine. Tell us where we are and where you think we're going.
So I think one of the best ways that we can address this question is to talk about no-go areas and go areas. So go areas in terms of Canada's long-standing support for Ukraine, $22 billion in multiple forms of aid, economic, military, humanitarian, training 47,000 members of the Ukrainian Armed Forces under Operation Unifier. These are go areas for Canada. We're going to keep working to support Ukraine in the short and the long term with this type of support. In terms of the peace plan process, I participated yesterday in a coalition of the willing call on behalf of the Prime Minister, and I'll say we are seeing sanctions, reparations, and unity, right? Making sure that all of the coalition of the willing countries stay together and cohesive through the peace plan process as being fundamentally important. We also have to recognize there are certain no-go areas. And what I mean by no-go is Canada is not going to tell President Zelensky what geographical boundaries he should be adopting. That is a decision for Ukraine and President Zelensky. Luhansk, Donetsk, Crimea, Kharkiv, those are decisions for him. And I was surprised today to read, or I perhaps shouldn't be surprised, that President Putin is saying that even if there is a ceasefire, they will not give up the Donbass. That is unacceptable. That is to me, but I will say what Anita Anand thinks is not relevant. It's what President Zelensky wants at the end of the day with his government on behalf of the Ukrainian people as a democratic state. That's what we are trying to support here. The ability for democratic governments to make decisions in their own best interests in terms of their territorial integrity and their sovereignty. Another no-go area is NATO membership, okay? In the 28-point plan, there was a point that Ukraine cannot become a NATO member. Well, that's for NATO countries to decide. It's not a negotiated point as to a potential ceasefire. We went through a NATO membership process with Sweden and Finland recently. There's a process. Canada supports that process, which is an open door policy in terms of calibrated decisions that NATO makes. But again, that's a no-go area in terms of a peace plan. Yes, we support a ceasefire. Yes, we support democracy. But above all, we support Ukraine's decisions to make them in their own best interests, regardless.
So, ladies and gentlemen, are we lucky to have such a smart, accomplished, feisty, and committed, wonderful woman as our Prime Minister?
Well, likewise.
As our Foreign Minister. Thank you.
Likewise, Janice. Thank you so much, Janice. Thank you so much, Janice. Thank you, Janice. Thank you to everyone.
Minister Anand, on behalf of Canadian Club Toronto, thank you for offering your vision of Canada's evolving role in the world and your leadership in guiding us through some of the most challenging times. Thank you. We were really honored that you chose our podium for your first speech. Thank you. Janice, your thoughtful moderation, gold standard. Thank you so much. Thank you again to TD and Sun Life for your sponsorship today, and a special thanks, as always, to our AV partner, VVC Live, for their reliable production support. And finally, we invite you to join us in the new year. On January 8th, we host our 49th annual Outlook to explore the year ahead in politics and economics. On January 26th, we welcome a panel of industry leaders to discuss selling to our strengths, unlocking Canada's trade corridors, featuring CN CEO Tracy Robinson, McCain CEO Max Kuhn, and Sean Strickland from the Canadian Building Traders Association. Please visit CanadianClub.org for more information on all of our upcoming events, on-demand content, and to become a member if you are not already one. On behalf of Canadian Club Toronto, thank you for joining us today, and have a wonderful holiday season. We look forward to welcoming you again in the new year.